Most men spend years trying to impress women. The ones who actually attract them do something completely different, and it has nothing to do with confidence. Heat is something that will quietly rearrange everything you thought you knew about attraction. It does not live in your wardrobe. It does not live in your bank account. It does not even live in the way you look when you walk into a room. The men who create the deepest, most lasting impressions on women are doing something almost invisible. Something that happens in the space between sentences. Something most men walk right past every single day without ever noticing it. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Right now, there are men having conversations that evaporate the second they end. Both people walk away, and within an hour, neither person remembers what was said. The exchange happened, but nothing was left behind. No trace. No feeling. No reason to think about it again. Then there are other conversations. Conversations where something invisible shifts. Where a woman who seemed distracted suddenly becomes focused. Where the energy between two people thickens into something real. Where she finds herself replaying moments from the exchange later that night, not sure exactly why. What separates those two experiences has very little to do with the topics discussed. It has everything to do with the emotional architecture underneath the words. And today, we are going inside that architecture together. After spending years studying the real psychology of female attraction, not the surface-level stuff, not the recycled dating advice that fills every corner of the internet, a pattern kept appearing. Certain conversational moves triggered something deep and consistent inside women. Not because they were clever. Not because they were mysterious. But because they aligned with how the female brain actually processes connection, safety, and interest. These are not lines. They are not rehearsed scripts. They are three specific psychological levers that, when activated naturally inside conversation, shift the entire emotional atmosphere of an interaction. But before we go any further, I'm Sarah Mitchell, and this is the Female Game. This channel exists for men who want something real. Not shortcuts. Not manipulation. Real understanding of how women think, feel, and connect. If that is why you are here, you are exactly in the right place. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and stay with me until the very end, because what I am about to share builds on itself, and the last piece might be the most important one. Now let me paint a picture most men will recognize immediately. You are at a social event. Maybe it's casual, a dinner, a gathering, a coffee shop conversation that started by accident. You start talking to a woman. The exchange begins politely. The usual questions move through the air like small talk always does. She answers. You answer. Everything is technically working. Nobody said anything wrong. But you can feel it. The flatness. That quiet, almost invisible absence of spark that makes a conversation feel like two people waiting for something real to begin. Then imagine the opposite. Imagine a version of that same interaction where, at some point, something changes. She stops glancing around the room. Her responses get longer. She starts asking questions that go slightly deeper than what the moment seems to call for. There is a pause, but instead of feeling awkward, it feels loaded. Like something is building just underneath the surface. That transformation is not accidental. It does not happen because someone said something brilliant. It happens because something emotional was activated. And emotion, not information, is what drives human attraction. Every single time. The brain does not fall into attraction logically. It falls into attraction chemically and emotionally. Words are simply the delivery system. When the right kind of words arrive in the right kind of order, they trigger genuine internal responses, curiosity, warmth, the quiet excitement of feeling truly noticed. And once those responses are activated, everything about how a woman experiences the conversation changes. So let us talk about the first psychological lever. And this one is subtle. Beautifully subtle. It works because it exploits one of the brain's oldest and most reliable instincts, the desperate, almost compulsive need to finish what feels unfinished. Psychologists call it the Zeigarnik effect. The brain holds open loops much more tightly than closed ones. Incomplete stories, unfinished ideas, questions that were almost answered, these create a kind of low-level mental tension that keeps attention anchored to the moment. Here is how this appears in real conversation. She tells you something about herself, maybe a story from her past, maybe something she is passionate about, maybe just a small detail she drops casually. And instead of responding in the predictable way, you say something like this: Asterisco, you know what, you remind me of someone. Actually, it doesn't matter. What were you saying about that trip? Asterisco, you move forward naturally. No staring. No emphasis. No dramatic pause that signals you're doing something intentional. But now something is happening inside her mind that she is not even fully aware of. An open loop has been created. Her brain has a thread it cannot tie off. Who did he mean? Why did he stop? Was it good or bad? That unresolved question keeps circling quietly underneath everything else that follows. And here is where the real artistry comes in sometime later in the conversation, not immediately, not in a way that feels engineered. She brings it back herself. She might smile slightly and ask, Asterisco, wait, who did I remind you of earlier? Asterisco, that moment is significant. Because she just revealed that she was thinking about you when you were not speaking. That is attention. That is investment. When you answer, you do not make it about her appearance. You make it about something you genuinely noticed in her character. Something specific. Asterisco, you reminded me of someone I know who has this rare ability to listen and make people feel like what they're saying actually matters. When you talked about your sister earlier, it had that same quality. Asterisco, watch what that does. It is not flattery. It is recognition. And recognition, being seen for something internal rather than external, touches a completely different part of human emotional experience than a compliment about someone's smile or eyes. The restraint is the technique. You are not explaining everything immediately. You are leaving just enough space for her imagination to participate. And imagination is the most powerful amplifier of attraction that exists, because the things we imagine about someone are always more compelling than the things they tell us directly. Now, the second lever. And this is where most men stumble, not because they ignore it, but because they do it in a way that accidentally undermines everything. Compliments. Here is the truth about compliments that nobody talks about honestly. For a woman who is reasonably attractive, appearance-based compliments do not register as meaningful the way men assume they do. It is not that she doesn't appreciate kindness. It is that those compliments have been repeated so often, by so many people, that they have lost almost all emotional weight. Asterisco, you're beautiful. Your eyes are incredible. You look amazing tonight. Asterisco, these words land like background music, present, but not heard. Now contrast that with this. You are mid-conversation. She explains something, maybe a situation she handled, maybe a perspective she holds, maybe the way she described a problem she once faced. And you say, Asterisco, the way you just framed that, I have never heard someone explain it quite like that. That was genuinely clear. Asterisco, or perhaps you notice something behavioral. Asterisco, you have this interesting way of making space for other people's ideas before you offer your own. That's rarer than you think. Asterisco, notice what is different. You are not commenting on what she looks like. You are commenting on what she does. Who she is. How her mind works. And that shift, from appearance to character, changes everything about how the compliment is received. Specific observation communicates attention. Attention communicates emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence, to the female brain, is one of the most reliable signals of a man worth investing in. Generic flattery triggers suspicion. Observational recognition triggers something softer, a quiet kind of gratitude mixed with surprise. Because being seen for your character is genuinely rare. Most people, even the people who know us well, comment on the surface. When someone comments on the interior, it creates an impression that is nearly impossible to ignore. Deliver this kind of compliment without ceremony. No dramatic pause before it. No waiting for her reaction afterward. Just offer it, continue the conversation, and let it land on its own. The goal is not to see her light up so you can feel validated. The goal is for her to carry that moment with her after the conversation ends. There is a more layered version of this technique worth understanding. It combines the compliment with what psychologists call identity reinforcement. When a compliment does not just praise an action, but reflects back a core part of who someone is, It becomes embedded in how they see themselves in relation to you. For example, imagine you notice that she has been quietly advocating for someone quieter in the group, making sure their thoughts get heard. Most people in the room do not catch this. Judo. And later you say, Asterisco, I noticed what you did earlier, making sure he got to finish his thought. That kind of awareness is not something most people have. Asterisco, that lands in an entirely different category than a compliment about her hair. Because it doesn't just say I find you attractive, it says I see who you actually are, and that is the experience women describe when they talk about feeling genuinely connected to someone. Not impressed. Not flattered. Seen. Now we arrive at the third lever. This one is frequently misunderstood, often attempted, and almost never executed correctly. It is the art of selective self-revelation. Or as most people oversimplify it, being mysterious. Real intrigue does not come from withholding. It does not come from playing distant or hard to read. Those strategies create confusion, not attraction. Real intrigue emerges from revealing something slightly unexpected. A contradiction in yourself. A small honest imperfection. An opinion that does not fit the box people might have placed you in. This works because it does something critical to the human brain. It breaks the pattern. When people meet someone new, the brain immediately starts constructing a mental model of who that person is. It categorizes quickly. This is a survival instinct. Once a category has been assigned, most of the brain's active curiosity about that person quiets down. But when someone says or does something that does not fit the assigned category, the brain is forced to reopen the model. Reconsider. Pay closer attention. Here is what this looks like in real conversation. She asks what you enjoy doing when you have free time. The predictable answers come: gym, travel, cooking, movies. Instead, you say something genuine but unexpected. Asterisco, honestly? I still handwrite letters sometimes. Not emails, actual letters. Most people think that's strange, but I like the slowness of it. Asterisco, the key is that it must be real. Manufactured quirks are detectable and they do the opposite of what you intend. But the genuine, slightly unusual truth about yourself invites a very specific kind of curiosity, the kind that makes someone want to understand you more completely. She begins building a more textured picture of who you are. And people become most attached to things they have invested mental energy in understanding. The more she thinks about you, the more she becomes interested in you. That is not manipulation. That is how human connection actually forms. Authentic self-disclosure also creates reciprocity. When you reveal something real about yourself, especially something slightly vulnerable, it gives the other person psychological permission to do the same. Wall slower. The conversation deepens. And depth is what transforms an exchange from forgettable to meaningful. 3 levers. Curiosity, recognition, intrigue. Each one activating a different part of the emotional landscape. Each one building on the others. Together they create a conversational experience that feels alive in a way that most interactions simply do not. But there is one more move that ties everything together. And this one is perhaps the most counterintuitive of everything we have covered. Before I share it, a question for you. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone asked you something, and instead of answering, they turned the question back to you in a way that felt genuinely playful rather than evasive? Where being asked what do you think, instead of being given an immediate answer, made you suddenly more interested in the exchange? If you have experienced that, you already know what I am about to describe. When someone asks you a personal question, the instinct is to answer directly. And sometimes that is the right move. But there are moments where gently reversing the question does something remarkable to the energy of the conversation. She asks, Asterisco, what made you choose the path you chose professionally? Asterisk, you smile lightly and respond, Asterisco, I'm genuinely curious what your guess would be. Asterisco, now something has shifted. She is no longer an interviewer receiving information. She is a participant in the construction of the moment. She begins observing you more closely, your posture, your expression, the way you hold the pause. She starts making guesses, and through those guesses, she reveals her own perceptions, her own values, her own interpretive instincts. This is one of the most fascinating dynamics in conversation psychology. The way someone tries to understand you reveals who they are. And when that process feels playful instead of clinical, attraction emerges almost organically. The reversal works because it creates shared investment. Instead of one person performing while the other evaluates, both people become co-authors of the exchange. And co-creation, the feeling of building something together in real time, is one of the most underrated but powerful foundations of genuine connection. There is one technical detail that makes this land correctly versus falling flat. De pause. After you offer the reversal, allow a brief silence. Do not rush to fill it. Do not soften it with a joke or a qualifier. Let it sit for just a moment. Silence in conversation is widely misunderstood. Most people treat it as a failure, evidence that the exchange has stalled, that someone needs to rescue the moment. But silence is not emptiness. It is pressure. And when handled with calm, it communicates something very specific. Asterisco, I am comfortable here. I am not anxious. I am not performing for your approval. Asterisco. That comfort, that settled quality of someone who is not desperately trying to be liked, is one of the most consistent triggers of deep attraction I have ever observed. Because it is rare. Because it signals something real. But use the reversal carefully. Deploy it once or twice in a conversation, not as a reflexive response to every question. Overuse transforms it from charming to evasive, and the entire effect reverses. Restraint is always part of the technique. Now I want to pull all of this together into one idea that holds everything else in place. Emotional leadership. This is the invisible thread running through everything we have discussed today. It does not mean controlling the conversation. It does not mean steering the other person toward a predetermined destination. It means holding the emotional tone of the interaction steady, calm, curious, open, while gently inviting the other person to meet you in that space. When you are emotionally led, reactive, anxious, performing, your words work against you regardless of how carefully you have chosen them. People can detect emotional instability faster than they can detect bad grammar. The nervous system reads it before the conscious mind processes it. But when your emotional state is genuinely settled, when you are present without being intense, interested without being eager, warm without being desperate, everything you say carries a different quality. The words become a vehicle for something the other person can actually feel. This is why two men can say the exact same sentence and produce completely different results. The words are not the message. The emotional state underneath the words is the message. And that emotional state is something you can cultivate. Not through pretending to feel calm when you do not. But through practice, through the gradual, real experience of interactions that go well, that build competence, that teach you through repetition that social connection is not the terrifying high-stakes performance anxiety makes it feel like. Each conversation is practice. Each exchange is feedback. Not judgment, feedback. When something does not land the way you intended, that is information. When something creates a shift you did not expect, that is also information. The fastest way to improve socially is to stay curious about what is happening rather than anxious about whether you are performing correctly. Here is something I want you to carry with you after this conversation ends. The men who create the most memorable, most magnetic conversational experiences are not the men who said the cleverest things. They are the men who made the other person feel most fully present. Most genuinely seen. Most comfortable being honest about who they are. That quality, the ability to create a space where someone feels safe enough to actually show up, is not a technique you memorize. It is a presence you develop. It grows from genuine interest in other people. It grows from the willingness to listen more than you speak. It grows from the courage to be honest about your own contradictions instead of performing a polished version of yourself. So as you move into your next conversation, try one thing. Not all of these ideas at once. Just one. Maybe the unfinished thought that creates an open loop. Maybe the character-based compliment that replaces appearance-focused flattery. Maybe the question reversal that transforms a one-directional exchange into something collaborative. Use it naturally. Observe what shifts. Notice the difference in how the conversation feels, not just how she responds, but how you feel inside the exchange. Because when the goal shifts from impressing someone to genuinely connecting with them, the entire experience of conversation changes. It stops being stressful. It becomes interesting. And interesting people, people who find genuine delight in the exchange itself, are the most magnetic people in any room. Not because of what they know or what they own or how they look, but because of how they make the world feel slightly more alive and engaging simply by being present in it. That is the real secret. Not technique, presence. Not performance, authenticity. Not impression, connection. Technique is just the door. Character is the house you invite someone into. If today's conversation sparked something in you, a new way of seeing an old situation, a shift in how you think about communication and attraction, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Tell me which of these 3 levers feels most relevant to where you are right now. Or tell me about a conversation that surprised you. The stories people share below have genuinely shaped the directions this channel has taken. Subscribe to the Female Game if you want to keep going deeper. We do not do surface level here. We go into the real psychology, the patterns that actually explain how attraction forms, how connection deepens, and how communication either builds or quietly destroys the possibility of something real. And remember this, the next time you are standing across from someone you want to connect with, you do not need a perfect line. You do not need a flawless performance. You just need to be genuinely present, genuinely curious, and willing to let the conversation become something neither of you planned. When those 3 things are in place, attraction does not need to be manufactured. It arrives on its own.